Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. Today, we've got Sebastian Riedel here. Did I say that right, Sebastian?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
You'd mentioned before I hit record that sometimes people pronounce it slightly different, so I wanted to make sure I got that right. And Sebastian is the CEO of the Oasis Travel Platform, which I've been working with your platform for quite a while. I'm gotten quite familiar with it, so we'll discuss that a little bit. But really, Sebastian, I'd like to kind of just jump in and start with a little bit about who you are. So welcome to the show.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to having this conversation. And yeah, thanks again for having me.
Yeah, no, it's my pleasure. Thanks for taking time out of your day to join us. So Sebastian, I believe that our listeners, they maybe want to know a little bit about what you do, but it's really about kind of who you are. That's kind of the theme of the show. And anybody that's listened to very many of the episodes kind of gets that. So I really want to kind of figure out who you are. How did you get from where you were, wherever that was, to where you are now? And we can go back as far as you think is relevant. So I don't know, what's the first thing that you think is relevant to your career choices?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, definitely, obviously travel is a big part of my life, and, this being a travel podcast, I definitely will tie things into that. But yeah, I guess I was originally born in Germany. My parents were living over there. So, my dad has been traveling a lot throughout our kind of childhood. So I definitely kind of got the travel bug early, living abroad. We lived in England for a year. In high school, I visited my dad, who was living in Italy. So yeah, definitely kind of started that travel experience early, and definitely learned the benefits of traveling and the sort of what you get out of visiting other cultures and learning, things are different from where you live. And to me, that's super exciting. And that's like one of the, best things to learn about different cultures in our world. So the travel bug kind of set in early. My path to the travel industry was a little bit, like many people, I'm sure, took a lot of different roads. So when I finished college, I started working for the electric utility in San Francisco. So completely different kind of world, and worked for the power generation department there for a few years. I kind of think of it as a completely different career. Studied environmental science after that. And then during that time at PG&E, I started getting into sort of like database programming and things of that nature. And then so my next kind of major job was working for a litigation consulting company in San Francisco. So probably nobody knows what that actually means, but it's basically a company that helps like law firms or large corporations go through large legal proceedings. So bankruptcies, class action lawsuits, things of that nature. And basically what I did specifically was we built web applications for and data like analysis applications for those huge legal proceedings. So things like building a website for tracking claims for a company that's going through bankruptcy, analyzing data for a class action lawsuit with just tons of information. And so it was very very tech heavy. I loved programming, so I really enjoyed it. It just was intense. So a lot of long hours. We worked for attorneys, so they work all the time. So we ended up working all the time. So it was fun. And that's where I learned to program. I learned to build software, deal with databases and so forth. And that was definitely something that I enjoyed, but it wasn't a passion. I always wanted to like do something that I was passionate about, which I think most people that get into the travel industry it's a passion for them. It's not a you're not going to get rich necessarily in the travel industry, but you're going to be doing something that you can relate to and love. So basically, back in 2005, a friend of mine in San Francisco came to me and said, I want to start this travel company. He worked for a company called AirTrex, and they are, I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but they were at the time sort of the leader in around the world travel. So a lot of sort of like adventurous types, backpackers, so forth, were buying tickets through them because it was the only way you could link together one-way tickets. Which now has gone away, but back at the time it was actually really important. And so he basically had spent a lot of time, dealing with customers who were planning these trips and booking their airfare, but then they didn't know what to do on the ground. And they were like, what should I see when I hear? And he was also an avid traveler, had all this advice for them, and was kind of like, wow, I'm just giving away all my travel secrets for free. And said, and also, just a, sort of being a passion. And so he kind of came to me and was like, we should, want you to help with the technology side. And then we also, our other business partner, Michael, came in on the sort of operational and sales side. And so the three of us started Global Basecamps. So that was sort of how I moved. And at that time, I was, just sort of exhausted from programming and that world. And so, yeah, to me, I was like, this is perfect opportunity. So
yeah, that sounds great. I'm curious, Sebastian. So it sounds like your undergraduate degree, or what you did, you mentioned you finished school and got into this. Was it like an engineering background? It sounds you mentioned tech heavy, obviously. What kind of education did you pick up?
Yeah. So I studied environmental science undergrad. Okay. And then I got a master's degree in ecology. So I was really going down the sort of science road and was, looking at potentially, even going further in that in the field of like ecology and sort of studying climate change and things of that nature. And so that was also heavy in sort of math and some programming and things of that nature. So kind of when I got out of that, transitioned to this job where I was doing programming, it kind of like that sort of took over the road of doing like science and environmental science and things of that nature. But yeah, that was my original sort of game plan back in the day. So
I'm curious, as you were going through school, I can see maybe a little bit more in school, environmental sciences and stuff like that, but then into the programming world. Did you feel like the people around you were kind of like-minded? Because you've got a passion for travel now. I don't know how strong that was then.
Yeah.
But was that difficult for you and maybe your colleagues or other people around you to kind of get you and understand your desire to travel? Or did it I'm just curious what kind of challenges came up when you were in that line of work?
Well, definitely when I was working in the sort of programming world, the sort of litigation consulting, it was so focused on just the sort of the technology and the job at hand. There was really no sort of travel aspect, what have you. It was literally like, for me, it was like, this is my paycheck that allows me to go and travel when I'm, done, not working and so forth. So yeah, there wasn't really any kind of crossover. So that's why I was kind of excited to just take this jump and be able to say, oh, I'm going to take some of the, skills I learned in programming and so forth and apply them to an industry or something that I'm passionate about. Yeah.
That's very cool. Cause I can't imagine that many, the programmers and engineering types are typically a little bit more kind of structured and maybe don't have the same desire to that wanderlust or whatever word you want to use for it. So during this time while you're doing that type of work, you weren't working in the travel business, but it sounds like you were earning money so you could go travel. So tell us a little bit about kind of what did that look like for you before you were actually working in the travel business? Were you able to travel and visit places?
Yeah, good question. Yeah. So, I did a fair amount of traveling at that time, mostly Asia. So, at that time, my dad was living in Vietnam. And so I took a couple big trips to where I would go and visit him for a few weeks and then just take a couple months and just wander around. So definitely did the full backpacking, through Vietnam, went to, Indonesia, because a friend of mine might be there for, this was also a while ago, I'm definitely going to age myself, but this was in the late 90s. So, when I was in that first time that I went to Vietnam and we went, I remember just my friend was kind of maybe going to be in Bali. So I just got a flight down there and just hung out. He told me that where the hotel, Three Brothers Bungalows, that's where he always stays. So I just got a flight down there, went to three, but this is like kind of like email is just kind of popping around, so it was like not this thing where it's so easy to connect with people, which I loved, because it was like, I literally went there, checked into the place. They pulled out the book, with its, paper where they have people, and said, has this person checked in, or has his brother checked in? And they're like, nope, nobody here. And so I was like, oh, bummer. Okay, whatever. I'll just go hang out. And that actually happened for a couple of days in a row. And then I actually just saw him, and I was like, oh, you are here. And he's like, yeah, I've been here for 2 days. And so it was like, those kind of things are like really fun. They don't happen anymore because you have your, phone with you, and you can just check and see if someone. So like, yeah, that was pretty fun. And we ended up spending 3 weeks just bouncing around different islands in Indonesia. So yeah.
Do you think that if you were to take kind of your experience then and kind of compare it to, because I travel a lot, you travel a lot. I'm sure you run into people that are kind of doing what you did back then, but they're doing it now with their phones and their, the different websites, they're booking stuff ahead of time, and they're using apps. I know that with Oasis Travel Platform, you guys have an app. So when people are traveling, they just pull out their phone and they know what to expect. So what do you think the differences are in the experience? I don't know where I'm going with this question, but how would you, what do you think is different? Was it better back then, or what do you think?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. It's hard to say. And it's one of those things, I think, when you're kind of looking back, you always, it was always better back then, everything was better before, but maybe that's not necessarily true. So I think, the excitement of like that sort of scenario that I just described to you, the sort of like, oh, wow, I just flew to Indonesia. I might not see my friend. I might be traveling for 3 weeks by myself, which is A, great, and B, I wish my friend was here with me or whatever, so there's like the positive, there's pros and cons to both. And I think sort of that level of like uncertainty, excitement, adventure, that maybe some of that sort of feeling is lost in some of the like the randomness of when you are kind of traveling in those, backpacker days with no internet and minimal internet and, minimal sort of resources. There's the positives are these sort of unknown and the adventure and the excitement, I feel like. But the flip side is, I think now people are able to sort of like, and there's also like back in those days, there's a lot of like, negatives necessary. I mean, you can turn them into positives, but if you're like, you missed the ferry, you're staying another 2 days on the island, and you're like, you're done with you're like, oh man, I really want to, so those things, which are again, like on the face negative, but really sometimes are the best things that happen to you, and then you're like, oh, this 2 days was great, so you kind of miss those, but I feel like now maybe with more information, you don't have as many of those. You're able to kind of maximize your experience maybe more. You're able to sort of like find stuff, so I don't know. It's hard to say which is better. I definitely enjoyed the sort of the excitement and the adventure aspect. But the flip side is, you have these times where you're like, you missed something, you're stuck somewhere, or you couldn't, you're, those things, which again, you could say it could be good and bad. But yeah, I think now, I don't know. But that's a really good question.
But I guess also, as I was listening to you, it's kind of occurred to me that we still have the option. I mean, I've got the phone in my pocket. That does not necessarily mean that I have to plan out everything.
Yeah.
So if I'm the personality that is, super spontaneous and loves those little surprises that come up along the way, I can always shut off my phone, put it in my pocket, or I can always just walk down to where I think there's buses and wait and get on a bus and just see where I go. I still have that ability.
That's
where
true.
The flip side was back in, the 80s, 90s, if you weren't spontaneous and adventurous, you just didn't go.
Yeah, you probably didn't want to be doing it.
Exactly. So at least I guess it's opened up a lot more opportunities for those people that don't have a different threshold for, risk aversion or whatever, I guess you'd want to say. But
that's a really good point. Yeah.
It's interesting. And then of course, there's always that, you go somewhere. It still happens to me. I go somewhere and I tend to not do a lot of research ahead of time. I go, and then like on the last day I'm leaving and I run into a taxi driver, I run into another guest, and they're like, oh man, did you go see such and such?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm like, no, tell me about it. And they tell you about it. And you're like, oh my gosh, I missed that because I was just disconnected. So, but that's part of it. So, all right.
For sure.
Very cool. I'm curious about your dad. I don't know if you want to go there or not, but you mentioned that he had traveled quite a bit. He sounds pretty adventurous, so I'm curious what was his background? What kind of work was he doing? And did that influence you in
Yeah,
any
for
of your
sure.
decisions?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, no, happy to talk about my dad. He's awesome. So his kind of like short stories, he grew up in a really small town in Northern California. And basically like really small, and went into the army, and went to Vietnam, and actually signed up, I think in 62. So before the draft, right before the draft. And because of that, they taught him how to speak Vietnamese. He went to the Army
Mm-hmm.
Navy language school in Monterey. And so when he went over to Vietnam, he was actually in a place where he was like, translating and so forth, and so he did a couple tours there. And then when he got out, he was on the GI Bill. So
Mm-hmm.
he went to UC Davis studying economics, and then just kind of like, he's told me about his sort of, he calls his life like the happenstance, or just kind of, like things just sort of happened and it unfolded. And so they were doing a master's program the first year he graduated, and they were like, hey, do you want to participate? And he was like, sure. And then so the next thing they were like, do you want to get your PhD? We'll send you to Hong Kong and you can study this emerging markets. And he was like, that sounds pretty good, So, and then, he did actually like took a motorbike through like Malaysia, Thailand, all the way down in like 65. He just drove his motorcycle down there and like told me stories about, we went to a place, this railroad hotel in Hoi An once. Hue Hin, and in Thailand. And he was like, yeah, I was here. This was 20 years ago. And he was like, yeah, I was here 30 years ago. And I was like, wow. That's amazing. Yeah. So yeah. That actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a big, impact of my travel bug, and like just seeing him go to these places. And he was lucky that then he started, his career in sort of, he became a professor and teaching like international economics. And so that allowed him to feel his passion of travel, and, being able to do like year sabbatical here, go to a conference and things of that nature. So like, yeah, that's a good point. I definitely, got a lot of that sort of travel bug from watching him, meld his career into a thing that gave him the ability to travel like all over the place. So, yeah.
What were I'm sure without going into too much detail, I'm sure you were able to watch him, kind of as he progressed through life doing these things, and you followed in his footsteps in several ways. I'm curious what challenges you saw come up either for him, for you, or other people that you've worked with in the travel business. Because I know sometimes it creates relationship challenges, financial challenges, all kinds of challenges. And I think we should touch on that. So I'm curious kind of what comes to mind.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely, in some ways, it's hard to, live the, I don't know if you call it normal or whatever life, if you're sort of have this wanderlust and you're always wanting to travel and explore new things and so forth. So yeah, definitely. I feel like that's something that, through his personal life has also taken, a journey of finding the right people and, that are compatible with the lifestyle of traveling and so forth. And so I definitely agree with you there. It's something that, and that's what makes it awesome, is when you do find that person that's like, this is, I have the same, desire to travel and do this and do that, or, totally fine with you taking off for 3 months and going and living somewhere. And it's definitely.
I'm curious if I don't know your relationship stats. We don't need to go there, but I'm curious. Do you have any tips or pointers? Because I relate to what you just said. I'm traveling. I've been traveling full time for 3 years. And that's the biggest challenge I've found is sometimes, I show up at some place and, oh, that's fascinating. They're really interested in me because I'm doing this, but then it's like, but I'm not going with you. Or they just they don't quite get it. I've had hundreds of conversations when people ask you, oh, where do you live? Well, today I live here. Next week, I'm not sure. So I'm curious if you have any tips or pointers for how do you find the right person to tag along with you, or at least put up with you.
No, it's hard. Exactly. It's hard to find someone to put up with me at different levels, on all the levels, but no, I'm just kidding. But I think it's interesting. I definitely don't have any pointers, unfortunately, but
Okay. Well, I thought I would just check to see if you had any good pointers for me. I'd read an article recently about, it's kind of, I wish I could remember the word, but it's in the diagnostic manual for psychiatric stuff in the US. And it's basically, it's wanderlust. It's that person that has such a desire for new experiences
Oh, yeah.
that it impacts their relationships, their finances, their this, their that. And it basically is wanderlust. There's another word for it, but it's that person that's like spending maybe they're not spending all their money on booze or drugs or gambling, but they're spending all their money on trips, or they're just blowing off their families. Maybe that guy who has a family and at 40, he decides I got to go, and, so anyway, I thought it was an interesting article.
I mean, that's a good point. And I think that's, sort of kind of what you touch on about wanderlust and kind of the difference between, my partner and I currently, she has the same sort of mindset in like, we would rather have like kind of memories than things, which, as you mentioned, your current status, obviously you're in the same boat because you want as little things as possible and as many memories as possible. But I think there's definitely, I'm not saying there's just two types of people, there's this types, but that is two different types of people. One is people who like, choose to have memories over things in certain ways. And there's obviously a scale, a sliding scale, but but that's something when you align with someone who's like, would you rather have a new, patio furniture set or just roll with this old one for the next 3 years? And then we can go take this awesome trip and, come back and just sit on the old patio furniture, but with these awesome stories that we're going to talk about,
That resonates so much. And I think the majority of people, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I get it. I just don't get it. It's, the majority of people, strive for that, the house and the cars and the pets and just the things. And that's part of why I'm divorced. And my ex-wife was wonderful, beautiful, wonderful woman. But I remember so many conversations every time Christmas came around. Yeah. It was like, we could take all the money we're going to spend on presents and we could just go to the Bahamas, or we could, go to Costa Rica or something. And I just always thought that was the most obvious answer to the Christmas question. Right. Yeah. And she would just like, no, I want to wake up in the morning and have the stuff under the tree and see the smiles on the kids' faces. And it was just such a disconnect that, we were together for a long time. And I realized that it wasn't fair to her either, because I was constantly, I'd sit there and watch videos about families sailing around the world on their sailboats. I'm like, let's go buy a sailboat. Right. And she's like, we need to buy a house. Right. Yeah. So anyway, I'm sure some other people listening to this, can appreciate that.
I think kind of maybe now that we've talked through it, that is kind of maybe one of the tips is like find that person where, people are like, at the beginning, I don't know, when you're young and you say, what do you want? You're talking to your significant, potential significant other. There's these things that, typical society said, like, do you want to have kids? Do you want to do this? Or do you want to, maybe the first question is like, where are you on the wanderlust scale? and are we in the same, are we in that same zone?
And I think the response would be interesting, because I've had similar conversations. The response is interesting because when you say, where are you on the wanderlust scale? If they're not high on the wanderlust scale, they probably don't really appreciate the question. They don't understand what it means. Because I've had so many people that I have conversations. Oh, do you like to travel? Almost everybody says yes. For sure. Do you like to travel? Okay, great. So what does that mean to you? Or the question I like to say, you have magic wand. You can go anywhere in the planet, for 2 weeks. Where do you want to go? And I used to get, when I was dating after the divorce, I used to hear Hawaii all the time. Like, I want to go to Hawaii. I'm like, but we're in Arizona. Come on, anywhere in the world. Oh, you just don't understand. And it's like, travel. So when someone says they like to travel, you got to dig a little bit deeper to kind of understand what that looks like. Okay. Do you like to carry everything you own in your suitcase and get on a bus with chickens and go from Airbnb to Airbnb for 6 months at a time? How does that sound? I don't know. I haven't solved it yet, but it's fun trying.
And it's good. It sounds like you're thinking about it a lot.
It does. Let's change the subject. Anyway, I want to hear a little bit more about Global Basecamps and how you guys came together. My understanding, based on our conversation so far, is you were kind of the tech guy with a passion for travel. Yeah. Which made a lot of sense, because a tech guy without a lot of passion for travel probably can't afford to go work with a startup to do something like that. They're probably, that sounds interesting. But so tell us what that was like, getting that business started, kind of some things that came up along the way and what you learned from that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So, like I was kind of starting to before. So basically, I had a friend, Gregor, and he was working for Airtrex and wanted to peel off. He had this idea of, basically servicing their clients, providing them with, ground services once they book their air flight. And then my other business partner, Michael D'Amico, and so he was kind of the sales and ops person. And so the three of us started it. The name Global Basecamps comes from the original idea was to take these people that are going on like a month-long trip and say, look, kind of still like in the sort of like grown-up backpacker mode where they're like, like you want to have this base camp. So if you're going to go to, like Cambodia and be in sort of the jungle, then like there's a really cool lodge here that you can do all these excursions from, or in Chiang Mai or whatever, and so this is your base camp, and you'll probably book it for 4 nights, and then you'll probably do some stuff as you transition down towards the beach in Thailand or something, and then you'll have another base camp down at the beach. And so that was the idea for Global Base Camps. And so that's how we launched and, kind of built out. We wanted to launch with sort of a web like bookable interface, as well as, sort of, just over, phone, email, so forth. And we quickly found that people that wanted to use the service wanted everything. So they'd want like, I'd like a transfer, actually would like you to kind of book, just the whole trip for me, tours, all of that kind of stuff. Leave a lot of stuff open, but, book those like, key tours, the accommodation and the transfers. So like we quickly, like within 6 months, kind of rethought our thing and was like, look, really what we're doing is building custom tours. We don't, those are the people that want to use us. The other people, they can do this stuff kind of on their own, or they sort of think they can actually. And so that's kind of so the name has always stuck, but, the Global Base Camps was really about having these cool lodges and cool properties that were your base camp to explore a region. Unfortunately, now people think of it really as just trekking, and they kind of have put a real like kind of trekking expedition connotation to it, which, we've thought about rebranding, so many times because we go to a trade show and they're like, oh, you guys just do trekking. And we're like, no, actually, so.
Where do you think they get that idea?
Base camp. Like kind of
just
like
the name, huh? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Maybe, just sort of like Makes sense. Think of a trekking base camp versus like a sort of what we were thinking. I think
we've got a camp set up at the base of every mountain, and that's exactly what we do.
Yeah.
That makes, I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, so we got started. We actually started in 2000. So it took us a couple of years to kind of get things going. And then, I think our first booking was in 2007. And that was like, I think we had like five trips planned. And then that's when I remember we had maybe like our 10th customer like called us up and was like, hey, I just lost most of my, retirement. I'm no longer going to go on that trip. And we were kind of like, oh, and that was like, I remember that was kind of like the beginning of the sort of that, recession and all of that stuff. So definitely a difficult time to start. And, kind of learned a lot in that first year or two of that, kind of trying to figure out how to kind of keep going. And, there were still people traveling and so forth. So just not the right environment to kind of start a, leisure travel business. Yeah.
Right. That being said, though, in hindsight, because it's always looked different in hindsight, would you have waited 2 or 3 years? Or do you feel like what you learned through that process was worth the headache, the frustration, the pressure, the stress, all that stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I think, with hindsight, I think we definitely would have wanted to keep launching, just maybe would have like sort of planned a little bit, more kind of like longer, better runway, kind of be like, okay, it's actually going to take us a little longer to get to profitability because this is going to be sort of lean times. But yeah, I agree with you. Like in lean times and, when things are hard is the opportunity to learn new things, like when you're, that I agree with you on that point for sure. In anything really, kind of like these challenges are the things that at the time you're like, oh man, this is the worst thing that's happening to us. And then later you're like, well, it did force us to figure out, like we got like, at that time, Airtrex was 95% of our business in the first year, basically. And so we got super, not word isn't aggressive, but just creative of like, we would go up, and it really came down to their salespeople, because they were high touch sort of booking these trips. Their salespeople being like, hey, do you have your ground, accommodations, transfers, tours sorted? Oh, you don't? Let me introduce you to so-and-so at Global Basecamps. If they did that, the close rate was through the roof. If they just said, we had some auto emails that were like, if you're interested in this, then your close rate's like at 2%, or something.
Yeah.
So
Super
so
passive.
we like would fly at the time. We would fly. They were based in San Francisco, so we would fly up to San Francisco once a quarter and meet with their sales staff and do a full kind of video presentation about our product and our services and all of that. We once created posters and we put them all around their office space of like AirTrex and Global Basecamp. So it was fun, and it was like, to that point, just kind of, we were in a place where we were like, this is our main revenue source right now, and we need to really maximize it. So we got kind of creative on how to do that,
Yeah, I see that. I've had quite a few conversations with people here on the show that have been through. There was that recession. Obviously, there was more recently we had a big one, and I think kind of what comes up for me is, if you always have done what you've always done and it's worked for you, you just kind of like, the door's open, people just keep coming in the door. There's no reason to think about, well, what could we be doing better? Yeah, you almost have this idea, well, it'd be foolish to try anything new because this is working. So you just kind of keep doing what you're doing for 20 years without even thinking about doing anything different or new. And then all of a sudden something happens, and you've got 20 years of practiced complacency for 20 years. And then something happens. You probably have a bigger staff and bigger expenses and all that stuff. And then something big happens. You're not even trained. You haven't even really thought about changes, where a newer business comes in and gets hit right away with that. Yeah. It's like, now your foundation, your roots is all in creativity and ingenuity and new ideas. And I think there are some advantages to that. And those are probably the companies that in the long run, eventually, but it's stressful, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I do kind of wonder about that too. We did actually kind of talk about, because also the other thing that kind of byproduct of that, which you just basically touched on, was, at some point we had, done these multiple trips to AirTrex, and we was like measuring the, increase in leads and so forth, and was like, this isn't going to do it. We need, definitely need to diversify where we're, and, then it was just sort of like, open the floodgates. Let's try everything. So it was kind of like, we had like, run out every ground ball. Like, this is like, someone would throw an idea. That's not a great idea. We're like, let's just try it. You never know, and so we, and luckily within, I think maybe by year 2 or 3, we got to kind of a place where we're at right now, where, the last time, when I was working there was 30% like repeats and referrals, 30% like, let's call it digital marketing, whether that's SEO, web, SEO, PPC, so forth, and then 30% partnerships, and AirTrex just being one of those. So it was sort of one of actually several, key partnerships. So, which I think, to your point, is key. Like, if something happens, your website, your SEO tanks or something, then it's like, oh, that's only 10% of our business. Or like, one of those partners pulls the plug. They say, we're no longer in business, or we're going somewhere else. That's only 10% of your business. To your point, is like, if you've been doing kind of the same thing, like you said, for 20 years and not trying new stuff, and you have one, legit, business model, business, sales channel, what have you, and that's, that goes away, then it's tough. Yeah. So
you're just not prepared to be flexible because you haven't been for 20 years.
Yeah.
And exactly. I mean, that's that way in our personal lives as well as in business. It shows up the same. If you haven't been to the gym in 20 years, and all of a sudden someone says you have to go to the gym,
right?
It's going to be tough, right? Because that's a change to your pattern. So where if you've been going to the gym for 20 years or doing different things, whatever they are, just continuing to grow, then when you're forced to make changes, it's just, maybe just a little bit easier. Yeah. I'm curious about Global Basecamps, and I don't know how you started out, and I'm not sure where they are now as far as kind of their business model. Does Global Basecamps own any locations, or do they work with DMCs in the different countries? How would you describe kind of how they do it?
Yeah. So DMCs. like, so yeah, 100%, or not 100%, but mostly DMC, some destinations, book some stuff kind of direct and work with multiple kind of local partners. But yeah, so basically, and that was the thing in those sort of, early years, was really cultivating relationships with the right DMCs. In my opinion, when people say like, what is the sort of differentiator? It's like learning to work with people that share your same values. So like
Right.
responsible travel was a big one for us. So kind of the biggest one for us is sort of, leaving the destination better than how you found it, making sure the money flows to local people, local guides, local properties, things of that nature. So responsible travel, sort of the uniqueness of the product. So definitely that's something we collaborated a lot with DMCs, was figuring out like, what's an experience that other people can't do, like
Right.
what's an experience that, and so like actually in Cambodia, there's one of the experiences that we have is to go and visit the lake and outside of Siem Reap, and basically do this. We partnered with Waves for Water, and they have this like water filter that you can put into any 5-gallon drum, and you basically can take, you can create drinking water from any water source. And so there, the lake actually gets brackish for part of the year, but people still continue to drink that water. And it obviously has really bad, and they also that's their sewer system. And so it's when the lake level when it's the wet season, it's not a big deal. When it goes down, it becomes a really big deal. And people live on, these are the community that's on houseboats. Mm-hmm. So what we kind of set up with our partner there is this experience where our travelers would bring a water filter with them, and they would do this 1-day experience out of Siem Reap, where they'd go and they'd get on a boat and they'd go and visit a family, and they together would show them how to build this, bucket that creates potable water. And it's like, I would say by far people came back and were like, that was my favorite day. Angkor Wat's amazing. Like, it's so beautiful and it's mind blowing, but like literally that day, meeting the family, feeling like I helped them, feeling like I brought, is like the best experience. And so like kind of creating those type of experiences, different destinations with our DMCs is really kind of what I think what Global Basecamp stands for, and what their kind of like value proposition is right. Allowing travelers to find those types of experiences. And a lot of times people don't know that, going to visit a school in Africa, and is like the best, better than the game drive, it's seeing these communities, learning about the communities, and like, seeing people in different cultures, I think is really what kind of sets things apart.
It's interesting. And before I go any further, I want to just mention for anybody that's listening that, throughout the letters DMC, so DMC Destination Management Company. I should have said it a little bit better for our listeners, but so it's partners on the ground is probably the best way to put it. So you've got partners on the ground in Cambodia that maybe they work with other tour operators as well. Maybe they don't. I don't know that, but they're the ones kind of on the ground that, that contract with the drivers and the guides and the lodges and all that stuff to, and then whereas like Global Basecamps or an outbound tour operator like Global Basecamps is going to, figure out how to put together trips that make sense, market them, have conversations with clients here in the US or other countries as well. So anyway, I just want to touch on that for the listeners, but also, I really want to get back to the human connection part that you'd mentioned, because I think that that's super important. I don't know how you put a number on it, but I'm just kind of curious you mentioned that's the experience that your clients tend to come back and rave about. I remember, I've been to Africa only a couple times, but I've spent a fair amount of time there when I went. And if you were to ask me, what's your favorite experience in Africa? That was easy. It was in Zambia, and we went and visited this little village, and a man that lived in the village was the tour guide, and he brought his 7-year-old son, Patrick, along for the walk through the village. And Patrick held my hand the whole time and was so proud to be involved in this tour. I think he was an aspiring tour guide. I'm not sure.
Right.
But the other kids would look at him, and Patrick was just grinning ear to ear, and he was so proud to be walking through the village with me. And so like hands down, like 10 times, and we did some amazing game viewing experiences and all this stuff, but that's always the experience that will come back to my mind. So, which brings up the point, like when we travel, maybe we don't always realize how important the connections are. Yeah. Human connections. Absolutely. But I mean, what are your thoughts? What would you like to share with listeners about kind of the value of what role does human connection play in travel like this?
Yeah. I mean, I think I think it's like unquantifiable. And
Yeah.
it honestly like, there's like that experience I just described in Cambodia, kind of just giving me chills actually just thinking about it. And the other ones that we have. And for me personally, I remember, go back to my dad for a second, but I remember the first time I went to visit him in Vietnam was, I believe, 96. And we had just like opened an embassy there, and he was living over there, just doing some actually work with the government. And I remember him describing what it was like, and via through email or something. And I remember just getting off the plane and him picking me up on a motorbike and jumped on the back, and we're driving through Saigon, and just like all of the like sensory, the people like just going about at this time it was all motorbikes. There was no cars or anything. And it was just like someone carrying like a huge, like pieces of rebar on a motorbike, no problem, or like 18 chickens. And, then like, the schoolgirls just riding their bike through all this madness, just no care in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then just like getting to interact with the people and seeing like how happy and just sort of like felt like balanced they were, and at the time I was like in the process of transitioning jobs and had gone over there because switching jobs and just stressed and, what am I going to do with my life and all of this. And like, here, these are people that, when you think about economic, advantages, we're like have gazillions more, opportunities and money, and things like that. And you have these people like just so much more kind of like centered and balanced. And so that was really the main thing that hit me that first time when I was there. It wasn't necessarily like, it was really just the people and how nice and genuine and kind they were to me, even, and like, yeah. So like, I think that is like like interacting with cultures and people to me is more or equally as important. I don't know, I can't quantify it, but as seeing some amazing site, as seeing Anchor, like I said, seeing this cool site or going to this cool spot, like actually interacting with people to me is what I get probably the most out of traveling. Yeah.
I don't know why it came up while you're talking, but if you think back, I just remember back to like the days of the Soviet Union. And if you went to the Soviet Union, people could go there, but you had a handler, I guess, and it's still like that. Maybe it'd be like that in North Korea. I think is Turkmenistan, or there's some places in the world that maybe you go, but you've got someone there that kind of makes sure you don't interact with the locals.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm like, why would I ever want to do that? If I was if I was like, I want to go to North Korea, but I can't talk to anybody. I don't want to go. It's like, what's the point? Or if I wanted to go to Machu Picchu, and people say, oh, there's lots of crowds, but I still want to go to Machu Picchu. But to be honest with you, if they shut it down for me for 3 days, there's going to be nobody else there. You can just do the Inca Trail by yourself. And I'm like, no, thanks. What's the point? At least give me a local guide that I can speak with or something. So anyway, I think the people that travel much kind of are in agreement. Maybe there's some people out there that really like solo travel, want to go climb a mountain by themselves. That's fine. But even then, maybe they're connecting with themselves. So I still think it's human connection.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, we could go on and on about all this stuff. It's fascinating conversation. And Sebastian, I want to ask you though, because we've discussed quite a few things. I feel like we could come back and do quite a few episodes. But I'm curious, what did I forget to ask you? What should I've asked you that you want to make sure our listeners know about? We didn't even really touch on Oasis. So maybe this would be a good opportunity to put that out there, because that's important. I want people to leave the conversation kind of understanding where you took that technology ability with your love of travel. So let's speak about Oasis for a few minutes here before we wrap up.
For sure. Yeah, definitely happy to share on that. So basically Oasis is basically a platform for tour operators or travel companies really to sort of streamline their sales and operations. So basically it's a CRM, an itinerary builder, and a financials management tool, all in one. And there's also a sort of traveler focused mobile app, so that would be basically a tool for tour operators clients to access all of their travel documents while they're traveling. So basically how that came about was at Global Basecamps, kind of maybe 10 years in, and sort of doing a lot. I built a lot of we built a lot of tools like Google Docs and spreadsheets and things to try to streamline our protocols and really get our team focused. But still, we just felt like we were doing the same thing over and over, running inefficiently. At this point, we were probably half remote. So half the team was in the office in Encinitas, and the other half were kind of scattered around, mostly the West Coast actually, but either way, just not in the office. And so we were like, we have to be able to do things, more efficiently. There's got to be a tool out there that's built for, companies like us that, will help us. We're ready. We kind of reached a point of revenue where we're like, okay, we can afford to pay something in software. So yeah, I demoed everything out there. And yeah, just for whatever reasons, we had sort of our deal breakers, and there was like, it couldn't be legacy software. We needed something kind of moving into the modern era. We wanted to send web-based proposals. We wanted to have everything under one login. We wanted it in the cloud, so that, the experience in the office was the same as if you're traveling or you're on a fam or you're in remote. So, so basically demoed everything and didn't really see something. And so we were kind of like, there's an opportunity here. So that's when I peeled off from Global Basecamps and was like, all right, I'm going to, build this software. And actually at that point, I'd been like maybe 12 years out of software, and I was just kind of missing it, and I was like, okay, my sort of like logical, nerdy brain is missing some of that process. So, so then built Oasis. And with the goal really of just allowing, tour operators to run more efficiently, to be able to send web-based proposals to customers, which is, huge, especially when you're like selling a $50,000 safari. If you're just sending an outline in email, like it's kind of like, it's a pretty big ask.
A PDF document that they got open.
Saying, hey, we want you to spend as much as you spent on a car or 2 cars, or in my case, like 10 cars. But we're just going to give you here's the outline, so I kind of just felt really, like there was a better way to do things. And so that's when we built Oasis, and it took a couple of years to get going, to build it. Global Basecamps was our first customer, obviously, and they tested it out for a couple of years. And then we were kind of just sort of organically adding companies to using Oasis. And then kind of that was, we finished the mobile app, which was kind of key, I think, to like, it's basically a tool for our customers, the traveler. And so we kind of finished that right before, unfortunately, COVID. So we were kind of like on this nice little path of like adding features, adding customers. We didn't want to like go full board and be like, hey, let's market to everyone. We're not really ready. I wanted to make sure everyone in the travel industry does things differently, which is kind of tough, so it's sort of like, we wanted to make it configurable, but not too complex, but, powerful enough to meet everybody's needs. Anyway, so then, that kind of happened right before COVID. And then, so that was obviously a little pause there. And then since COVID, I've really found that more and more companies that are just really focused on becoming more efficient, and doing, figuring out kind of like what this kind of ties right back into what you were saying before about, the sort of tough times making you more, nimble and giving you the opportunity to challenge. I feel like it has, sort of bumped the interest in people saying, you know what, I really need to switch platforms, because it's kind of a big ask to get someone to say, all right, you've got this process down, whether even if it's just a spreadsheet and email, and you're creating itineraries in Word documents, you've got it down, like switch everything and move to this platform. A lot of times people are like, I'd love to, but I just can't right now. I'd love to. You hear that a lot. And so I think kind of the COVID maybe made people like say, you know what, I can't do like later. I need to, if I want to get more efficient, I need to do it now, or, more kind of ready to like take those jumps in terms of like, kind of like seeing an opportunity to upgrade, whether it's your itineraries or upgrade the way you're tracking your clients or, tracking your finances, so forth. So,
Well, and you touched on kind of like, from the potential client standpoint, they're booking a $20,000 trip and they're getting a PDF that was created in Word. But then there's also on the other side of that is your planners. If you've got a travel business and you hire a new planner and they come in and say, okay, you got to go into the drive, go into the Google Drive and find the document and just copy paste and make sure you read everything, because it probably got, corrupted by the last person that went in and used it. And here, grab some photos, go online, grab some photos and paste them into the document. Like every time they send out a proposal.
Yes.
And they're like, are you kidding me? And especially if it's someone that's worked in a different industry where, because the reality is a lot of tour operators are still kind of working in that world, where like
totally. Absolutely.
The technology they have now was pretty cool 20 years ago. when they started. But as somebody, and this is not a paid ad, you haven't sponsored the show, you haven't sponsored this episode, but as somebody who has been working in the platform for, probably about 6, 7, 8 months now. Nice. There's a bit of work in the beginning. Yeah, absolutely. Sure. You got to take everything in your old Word documents and figure out, okay, what should we really be doing with this? Put it into the system. But then once it's there, it's there.
Yeah.
And then the planners can literally, it's like, okay, planner, new planner. This is how you do it. Here's some templates. Here's some samples. Boom, boom, boom. You want to change something. You just literally grab one module, plug it in. It's pretty cool. So I'll give you a big kudos for my experience with it so far.
Thanks for saying that. I appreciate it. But actually you brought up an interesting, like a good point. Actually, something that we've been focusing on is I feel like it's really a powerful tool, and you can almost do anything, anything in terms of the world that we're in. But I think it is complex. And so it's one of those things where the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. But it's also an area where we recognized in the last few months, we're like, we need to make this, we want to keep the power. We want to keep the flexibility, the configurability, allow people to like really take it, where they want to. But we do need to, we're putting a lot of resources into kind of better documentation, kind of making some processes more simplified, building even from the UI standpoint, so people are a little bit more clear on what each field does and things of that nature. So, and that directly addresses kind of what you're talking about. I think that's something that's important, is making it, as user friendly and, able to like understand the functionality better. So, yeah.
And you've got two challenges. One is the person with the organization that's implementing it, that's, maybe transferring all the information, from their old itineraries, kind of getting everything set up. So there's that person on the team.
Yeah.
And then there's the other level. It's like, okay, you've got a planner who's not an administrator of the account or anything.
Yes.
But so you've got two different levels that you can work on that. And I know you guys are constantly making changes, and we just got an email the other day that everybody on my team, that I'm working with, was excited about. So
cool.
It's good to see those constant improvements. So anyway, so I'm on board.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Sebastian. Thank you so much. Anybody that's listening to this, if you're in the travel business, you're interested in Oasis, we've got a link right in the show notes. Go take a look at it. Reach out to me if you have any questions about my experience. I'd give it a big endorsement. So go to the website, connect with Sebastian, I'm sure, on, LinkedIn, all these different places. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we say goodbye?
No, I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for having me on, Jason. I feel like we went to some spaces I wasn't even anticipating, but they're fun to talk about. It's great. Yeah. I love talking about my dad and remembering kind of the first times I visited in Vietnam and all that stuff, all the way from there to, technology, travel platforms. Yeah, it's great to cover.
I could tell you enjoyed it. I could tell you enjoyed it. For those the listeners that aren't able to see your face, when you were talking about your dad, you're kind of grinning ear to ear. So
okay,
I'm happy I asked about that as well, because I almost let that go, but I was like, we got to get back to the dad conversation. There's something there, and sure enough, there was. So
it's a little more interesting than software,
Well,
we can nerd out on software too. Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Jason. Sure. I really appreciate
thanks, Sebastian. Have a great day.
All right. Have a good one. Okay, take care. Bye.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.